up you guys, this is Rob from Guy Plays, and today on the most interesting Warframe ever, we're premiering a new series on the channel where we delve into the history, the mechanics, or even the community reception of a specific Warframe to see why it may just be the most interesting Warframe ever. So just keep in mind, this is the title of a series and not necessarily the reflection of one specific Warframe. However, if you are interested to figure out why I think that Mirage may just be the most interesting Warframe ever, definitely stay tuned. Ever since Mirage hit the scene, she's caused a bit of a commotion, from frying lower-end systems with Hall of Mirrors upon her initial launch, to defining iconic metas such as Cyanoid Simular Mirage, Overextended Prism Blind, or Total Eclipse Peacemaker. Her unique skill set has haunted both devs and players alike, sparking weapon reworks, ability reworks, balance passes, and the dreaded quote, "Have you tried this with Mirage?" And while all of those do make for a very interesting frame, they only touch the tip of one very big iceberg. While her offensive skills do tend to take center stage, Mirage has had another theme running a bit more subtly in the background. Literally. Although she was not the first to pioneer environmental interactions, with Volt's original ultimate Overload blazing the trail, Mirage's Eclipse and Sleight of Hand has definitely upped the ante when it comes to using her surroundings to her advantage. Eclipse, as many of you know, measures the amount of light in an area and gives a corresponding buff to damage when illuminated, or a damage reduction when amidst the shadows. This mechanic has actually influenced another ability in the game. Octavia's Amp measures the amount of sound in an area and gives an escalating damage buff as the noise level increases. This just goes to show that since the tech exists, it can inspire new abilities, which is definitely exciting when we consider Sleight of Hand. Now, this has never been Mirage's premier ability, and many look at it as a bit of a throwaway. However, the mechanics behind it and its potential utilization are quite thought-provoking. First and foremost, it tampers with items that exist in the map, completely retooling their behavior. Arc traps and turrets turn against their owners, but more interestingly, laser doors don't just shock enemy units, but also restore energy to allies who pass through them. Instead of just redirecting the targeting, Sleight of Hand has actually introduced a completely different effect. Very similarly, Kubrodan's storage containers, resource caches, and explosive barrels gain the ability to blind surrounding enemies when destroyed. Orokin defense lasers have their cooldown timers reduced, and ziplines gain the ability to electrify the first enemy that uses them. Coding different effects into different environmental objects could potentially lead to some very interesting Warframe passives. But manipulating her surroundings doesn't stop there. This ability also tampers with enemy AI, drawing them towards control panels that explode once activated, and to storage lockers that deal finishing damage equivalent to their total HP. Yes, that is right, she imbues lockers with sentience and gives them the ability to execute enemies despite their level. Hilarity aside, this tech has influenced abilities like Avara's Noise Arrow, Octavia's Resonator, and Titania's Lantern. In addition to that, this ability also weaponizes unused pickups, detonating them upon activation. But it's not that simple. Each pickup actually results in a different elemental explosion. Cold for ammo, heat for health, electricity for energy, and toxin for affinity orbs. The potential uses of extraneous pickups could be used to fuel Warframe abilities or act as a secondary resource pool, much like Nidus's mutation stacks. While it may not be at the forefront of the minds of most Mirage players, the way she subjugates her surrounding environment, manipulates enemy AI, and utilizes unconventional resources brings to light some very unique possibilities for Warframe's future, and solidifies Mirage as one of the most interesting Warframes ever. Now, that brings this segment to a close. However, if you'd like to hear further discussion of the potential uses of Mirage's skill set, be sure to stick around for gameplay coming up next. So I think what fascinates me the most about Mirage is all of the things that kind of like went into making her Sleight of Hand, and all of the environmental interactions that she had, because legitimately, that's one of the biggest features to Mirage that I don't think people really talk about. They're like, oh yeah, she can make multiples of herself, she could do a lot with Hall of Mirrors, she can do a lot of damage when it comes to buffing up the team and buffing up herself in that case as well. But legitimately, nobody really talks about all of the environmental affecting abilities that she has and all of the kind of like influence that it could have potentially in the future. And I actually really like the thought of that. So one of the big things that we're talking about here is environmental alteration and how that could affect potential like Warframe passives or just Warframe abilities in general in the future. One of the things that I really like to think about is maybe potentially giving a Warframe passive hacking. And I think that would be really cool as a Warframe passive to actually just give them the ability to get into the system itself. To be able to kind of like maybe even offer it up to a stealth frame or like a a hacking frame or something along those lines where they could literally walk up to a security console, hack the systems of an existing ship, and give them the ability to, you know, either never be detected by cameras, never be locked out by laser doors, never have to deal with any kind of like, you know, any kind of those passive effects, even maybe making potential spy missions a piece of cake, not having to deal with arc traps or anything like that, or even potentially turning all of that against enemies just innately, just having that ability in their kit straight out of the gate. In addition, what I was thinking that I thought would be really, really interesting for a passive for a Warframe, and it all kind of, you know, springs again from Mirage's abilities, was to actually give a Warframe passive buffs for breaking things. I mean, almost kind of like a berserker effect, like you break crates and you get movement speed or you get attack speed from breaking crates, or even potentially giving them a little bit of a power strength or a damage buff based on the breaking of terrain. I mean, I think that would be amazingly fascinating, and the fact that, you know, terrain can already be coded to grant certain things like, you know, explosive effects that blind enemies, I don't see why it couldn't also give like a bonus to your Warframe as, you know, as the mission progresses, right? To kind of be able to give frames this passive ability to grant, you know, be granted buffs, or almost maybe even have like I guess, I know this sounds really, really strange, but almost like a combo counter for things that they've, for terrain that they've broken, right? Or maybe just a counter in general, which kind of gives them stacks for breaking terrain, and potentially giving buffs to the Warframe itself, like a Marauder Warframe, or like, you know, maybe even, I hate to say it, Hydroid, giving him a passive of like a Plunder passive or something like that for all of the pickups that he's currently been granted in the mission itself. And I think that would be absolutely fascinating because of the fact that, you know, the devs have proven that they can code in effects from destroying, you know, terrain or destroying containers or whatnot. I think that would be really, really interesting to see what they can do with that, or to push that even further into the game. Now, of course, because of the fact that this really depends on what tile set you're on, I would love to see that more of like a passive thing than something that's really like actually ingrained into a Warframe ability. That's why I kind of like slipped in there. I was like, let's make this a passive, maybe not necessarily something that is dependent on an active ability. Something fun, something along those lines that give a little bit more flavor to the character, because I think being able to hack into things, or being able to kind of like plunder things would be really interesting way, a really interesting way to kind of give flavor to frames out there. I think that would be really cool. Another thing that I think would be absolutely interesting is the way that Mirage utilizes all of these extra pickups around her. You know, how each of them were, and I found it really interesting because I knew that they were coded in such a way that each of the pickups gave like different bonuses and whatnot. But I thought that would be really interesting if we, let's say, had a Warframe that could utilize those pickups. Maybe, or maybe even a weapon that could utilize those pickups. Let's get serious. But let's stick to the Warframe theme first before my brain gets carried away with all of the potential uses of this. But legitimately, if we had a Warframe who, let's say, maybe had an ability to consume extra pickups, right? Maybe this Warframe, he or she, would grant themselves, you know, maybe like a steroid buff. You know, they get a little buff. But if in their vicinity, there's any extra ammo or whatnot, or any extra pickups in their area, they almost like get the ability to vacuum all of those extra pickups in, and those extra pickups give them extra boost to their health. So let's say there is a health orb, right? Let's say there's a health orb, let's say there's a health orb in their vicinity that they can't use. What if they were able to utilize that health orb, so when they, you know, had that buff that came up, right? Whenever they activated that buff and it was in the vicinity of a health orb, that buff would actually give them bonus health for the remainder of the mission. I think that would be really cool. Same thing goes for energy. Maybe extra energy gain throughout the rest of the mission. That would be really, really cool. Or maybe even the ammo, giving them a temporary buff that gave them a bonus to their weapon damage. I think that would be really, really fascinating because you can now utilize all of those things that are just sitting there, and it makes for a very, very flavorful character. Or even potentially being able to attach that to a weapon so that every time you reloaded your weapon, that it would suck in any extra ammo in the general area that maybe wasn't being used, and use that as a temporary steroid for the weapon itself. Like, it's just fascinating the things that they can do with all of these, you know, environmental skills. And that's something that we didn't really see on any Warframes except for Volt originally. Now, if you guys didn't know, maybe for some of the newer players out there, Volt originally had, instead of his current ability right now, which is called Discharge, which makes me think of some terrible, terrible STD out there, he actually had, I believe it was called Overload, or something very, very similar to Overload, which would actually, you know, deal a wave of damage that kind of like was expelled from him, and then would actually jump to any kind of like lights in the area or consoles in the area, and would get a boost in damage from that, allowing them to do, I guess it would almost emit like arc traps from those areas, from what I can remember. It's been such a long time, but I thought it was absolutely fascinating that he could use that. Now, clearly, because of the fact that he could only use it once, and he could bust up lights and whatnot, did kind of like hinder his ability. That's why, you know, I definitely was kind of pushing for this thing to, you know, environmental effects to be specifically passive based instead of something that was more actively in a Warframes kit. But I thought it was just such an interesting use of the environment. And, you know, to find a way that we could possibly potentially use that in a Warframe, which maybe didn't necessarily hinder them, or make them only effective in certain tile sets, I thought was really, really interesting. So let me know what you guys think, because you know, honestly, to me, it's really, really fascinating, all of the extra coding that they went in for Mirage's ability. I mean, if you even think about it, literally Mirage has an execute. She literally has an execute, you know, attracting enemies to nearby, like, what are they called? Like, lockers. And the game knows how much their max health is, and we're like, we're gonna do that to finisher damage, and we're just gonna kill these enemies outright. I mean, what if you could literally use an execute type on an enemy? Maybe it's on a cooldown, or maybe it's something that, you know, is tied into a different ability, but to be able to have that power to deal finisher damage to an enemy to their max health, and maybe use that for something else. Maybe use that as a heal for the group, or maybe use that as AoE damage, or something along those lines. I think it's fascinating how Mirage has all of that tied into one environmental effect ability. Let me know if you can think of any other uses for the extraneous resources that we find on the battlefield. Let me know if you can think of any other environmental affecting passives that we could potentially use in future Warframes, and in future Warframes. And also, in addition to all of that, let me know what you think of the beginning of this series, and let me know what you think is the most interesting Warframe ever, and why. Toss that all in the comments below. And in addition to that, I know some of you guys have been clamoring for a glyph giveaway, so check in the pinned comment below, because we're going to do one of those time release ones that I really, really like. But that about does it for now, so as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch yo body. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye. Or she did a kiss.